Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Dool. I'm a research analyst for the Regional District of Central Kootenay. Welcome to the West Kootenay West Transit Services Committee meeting. We're going to have an election for chair this morning. This is the first time I've done this. Feel free to correct me if I'm out of order or anything like that. But I think we'll start by calling for nominations. We'll do it. Yes, Director Henniker.
I nominate Director McFadden.
So first,
you asked me if I accept.
do you accept?
I do.
Okay, that was the first call. Any other nominations? Okay, second call for nominations. None. I don't see any nominations. And third call for nominations. I don't see any nominations. Okay, I think we have an election by acclamation. There's no need to put the ballots forward or anything. Would you like 2 minutes to address the committee?
No, I don't think anyone needs to listen to me talk for 2 minutes. Great, thanks everyone. Okay, we're moving on. Okay, welcome everyone. We're moving on to 5.1. We acknowledge and respect the Indigenous people with whose traditional lands we are meeting today. Adoption of the agenda. Great, seconder, see a seconder. Any additions? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Great. None opposed. Great. Moving on to receipt of the minutes. Any errors, omissions, any discussion on the minutes? Not seeing any. Okay, thanks. And we move on to 6.1, BC Transit update is, I see her there, Miss White, do we see you? Welcome, and I will hand it over to you for your update for this morning.
Hi, good morning. You have to bear with me. The power in my house just went out, so I feel a little in the dark. I'm hot spotting off my phone. And,
well, we can see you and we can hear you, so we're doing okay.
And hopefully this will all be done before my laptop battery dies, if the power doesn't come back on.
Great, we hope so too.
All right. So I am going to share my screen, but while I do so, I won't be able to see anyone on your side. So if anyone has any burning questions or you need to interrupt me or ask a question, please just say something.
Yeah, I'll keep track.
Okay. Now let me. I just need to, do I have the ability to share my screen? Oh, here we go. Okay. All right. Can you see my presentation?
No, we cannot yet.
Can we share it from my end?
Yeah, Carly can share it from our end. Would that work for you? And you can just indicate when you want the slides shifted?
Sure. Yeah, that works fine too.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just start with the introduction slide. So for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Dana Kawite. I'm the Government Relations Manager with BC Transit and the main point of contact for local governments, particularly Tom Dool, for all things transit. And if you go to the next slide, got a couple items today just to give updates on. One is on the UPass. Also talking about some sort of service changes that we are proposing for the summer. Bit of a performance summary, and then just an update on some of the capital projects going on in the region. So next slide to UPass. So we have been talking with Selkirk College for quite some time about the potential of introducing UPass into the West Kootenay transit system. So the UPass program gives students unlimited access to transit services in their local transit system at a heavily discounted rate, and all eligible students would be required to pay the UPass fee. So typically this is any student who has at least one course on campus, on a campus. There tends to be a few exceptions, but by and large, the reason they're able to get a discounted rate is because all students have to opt in and purchase a UPass. Next slide. So several benefits of UPass. It is affordable for students. It does, we have found it creates lifelong transit users, particularly people that get accustomed to using transit, maybe before they have a car. They do tend to feel more comfortable using transit later in life. It's convenient for even the casual users if they're out at night or need to go somewhere they don't usually go. They could always sort of have this essentially paid for bus pass just in case. There's environmental benefits. It does reduce parking demand on campus. So this is a benefit for people that don't use transit and do want to park. It creates more parking space for them. I understand Selkirk doesn't charge for parking, so there's not as much of an incentive for sort of freeing up parking space on campus. It does create another sort of informal transit partnership. So Selkirk College would become more of a transit partner and have more of sort of a stake in the game and potentially some involvement with the West Kootenay Transit Committee, even just on a more informal basis. And then it also secures transit revenue. So you do have, it is based on enrollment numbers, but there would be sort of a secure revenue source, and that revenue source does go to the local government partners, including the regional district. So next slide.
I have a question in house here.
Sure.
Yeah, Director Lockwood.
Thank you. Hi, Danica. I just, so before we get too far down the UPass, I have a couple of questions. So you're saying all students have to purchase it for Selkirk College?
Yes.
Does that mean that somebody that doesn't have transit available to them, that may live in Samo, will have to purchase a pass if they're using Selkirk College, going to school at Selkirk College for anything?
So there would be some exceptions, and those exceptions would be developed as part of the agreement if we get to that stage. So some of the exceptions could be for people that live in an area that doesn't have any transit service. That could be one of the exceptions that's allowed. But essentially the way that this becomes affordable is that the vast majority of students at Selkirk College who have in-person courses would be required to pay. There's also some exceptions that might be made for people who might have a physical reason that makes them unable to use transit. But again, those would be negotiated as part of the agreement. So it does allow for exceptions to be made based on where people live or their ability to access transit.
Thank you.
Director Jackman.
Yes, thank you through the chair. So interesting when you talk about parking, because managing an asset like a parking lot is not cheap. So I was wondering, is the college itself putting any money in directly to support the UPass purchase, or is the full portion going to be put in on the students, on the backs of the students, I guess is the first question.
It is paid through student fees. So the college doesn't, I'd say, put in any funding towards it or support it. It does become, if it's approved, it does become part of a student fee. And it is quite affordable. It ends up, so the proposed UPass rate that was sort of provisionally endorsed by the West Kootenay Transit Committee was $60 per semester for someone who is who has, I'd say, a typical course load. So that's $60 a semester. And right now, for a student who's buying a semester pass through the existing fare structure, is paying $125 for that bus pass.
That's it. Can I do a follow-up, Chair?
Yep, go right ahead.
Yeah, and that's expected because, giving a heavily discounted rate recognizes that not everybody uses the bus all the time. This didn't exist when I went to university, but I do recall at UBC massive sprawling parking lots chopping down forests to be able to provide somewhere for us to park. And it was a formidable hike to get in if you did drive. And so back then I took the bus anyway. The thinking is when they have a vote, it would be good to have the college admit that they save money by having more students use the transit. They save money because they won't have to expand parking. I realize their enrollment's down, but eventually it costs money. They don't have to resurface as often with lower utilization. And the cost every year in the short term is they don't even have to plow every area, or they can leave piles of snow if the utilization of parking is reduced. So it'd be nice for the college to show us their capital asset management for their parking facilities and admit that they save money with more students using transit on just the routine maintenance, snow plowing, whatever they have to do in their parking area. And that might make it easier for a vote when the students come to vote. If the college says, well, yeah, we should be paying $10 per student or $20 per student. So just a thought, the college has to recognize the benefit of the transit system on their facilities, not just the benefit to the individual student.
Yes. Yes, agreed. We've certainly had support from college staff. We haven't spoken to them about their potential willingness to subsidize this UPass rate, but that's certainly something that we could propose if we get to that state. Ultimately, it is the student union that does decide whether this goes to referendum, and then it is the students who ultimately decide on whether they want this program to proceed. And if we go to the next slide.
I have one more question from Director Watson.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Director
Thanks.
Watson? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just curious, so the difference in this program, the proposed difference in terms of what the students pay versus the cost of servicing, who pays that difference? Does that go through taxation, or is that something the union would pick up the difference on?
Sorry, I don't think I quite understand that, the difference. This ends up being it ends up being an increase in revenue for local governments and for the transit system.
What I'm looking at is your existing fare rate. The UPass rate is half of that. So the determination on the rates have something to do with the cost of operations. So when you reduce that, who's subsidizing that reduction?
Nobody. You have many more people paying the UPass than you do paying currently paying for a semester rate.
Mr. Jewell wants to add.
And my power just came back on.
All right. Respectfully, through the chair, so that $60 is a charge on every tuition fee. So it just gets added to tuition. So we get all of the students contributing to public transit as opposed to a percentage of those students. That $60 number has been figured out by BC Transit. They sort of looked at the number of students, the amount of revenue that we need to make this work in order to provide those services. It's intended not to come at a loss to the taxpayer, although, we are now, the risk in this is that we become dependent on Selkirk College enrollment levels as opposed to Selkirk College transit riders, right? There's a relatively fixed number of transit riders in that community. But if we become, say, if we had done UPass in 2019, we would have anticipated an additional 800 students enrolling per term. And when those students disappeared, so too with the revenue. So that's the risk in this.
Director Watson, follow up, or are you good?
Sorry, I'm good. Thank you so much.
Great. Okay, back over to you.
So essentially based on some of our sort of rough estimates and bear in mind, we don't know how many students are purchasing a semester pass right now. We've made some estimates based on how many semester passes are sold at Selkirk College. We assume that most of those people purchasing a semester pass at Selkirk College are a Selkirk College student. And based on some of those assumptions, we've done some revenue estimates, and it does look like there would certainly be even at these lower enrollment rates, there would be it would bring additional revenue into the transit system if UPass was implemented. But just going sort of over to the sort of next steps. So there is a lot of back and forth. We have been working on this and talking to Selkirk College for quite some time. In October of 2025, the West Kootenay Transit Committee did provide provisional approval to sort of proceed with this, and also gave provisional approval of the rate of $60 for a semester, which aligns with the monthly rate for an adult pass, which is typically what we recommend the price of the UPass is. And then if the price of a monthly pass goes up, maybe to $65, the price of the UPass typically would go up to $65 as well. So they just keep matching each other. Recently, we did present to the Selkirk College Student Union Board of Directors about the UPass. They are going to essentially take it away, do a little bit of informal engagement with their student body, and ultimately come back to us in a few weeks with whether they would like to proceed to referendum. If they would like to proceed to referendum, that would likely be held in the fall of 2026. They do engagement in the fall, and then in the spring of 2027, they would have a general election to approve the UPass program. And then it would again come back to local government partners for sort of final approval of whether they were on board to agree to implement this UPass after additional sort of, I'd say, negotiation about the specific terms and conditions and exceptions that would be required. So we're about midway through the process, but we have officially engaged Selkirk College on this, and it is in their hands at the moment about whether we continue to sort of proceed down this path of potentially introducing a UPass. So that's sort of where we are right now. It is a long road. If everything does get approved, it wouldn't be until September of 2028 that we would be implementing it.
I have a question from Director Hanegraaff. Go right ahead.
Yeah, what happens between September 2027 or summer 2027 and September 2028? That seems like a really long period of time to formalize something, or what is that?
A lot of that, or the timelines on the college's side for introducing a new fee into their student fees, and their timing around when they do referendums and how their councils work. So we're working with some of the timelines that they have.
Yeah, Mr. Joe.
Respectfully through the chair, so when they add the fee, if the student union agrees to add the fee, the college then needs to look at their math, and then they have to go to the provincial government for permission to add that as a fee. So they have to go all the way to Victoria to do this, which is one of the reasons why the timeline takes so long, right? Because we're involving local government, student unions, and the provincial government. It's a convoluted process, but it has been successful in a number of different campuses in British Columbia. I'm hopeful.
So
You good,
supplemental, if I may. Once it's in, it's in, right? If they decide to change their mind, do they have to go through the same thing again, or what?
I'd have to confirm, but I think they would have to go to referendum potentially again to remove it.
Okay.
and then give, a set amount of notice.
Boy, nothing happens fast, eh?
No. Typically what we've seen is once the UPass is in, students get used to the additional fee and we don't get complaints. And I'm not aware of any colleges backing out of the UPass once it's introduced. It definitely seems to be appreciated. Students use it. It encourages students who may not have tried transit to use transit. So I think the students typically like it. And it becomes an expected part of their sort of semester tuition fees. But getting it in is a challenge, and it is a long process.
Great. Director Davidoff.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to thank Tom and Danica and Tom's predecessors, and we've been talking about this for I don't know how long. I don't know if it's been as long as I've been on the board, which is a bit, but I'm just it is a painfully slow process, but the key thing is that we have made a very big move on this. So I'm very pleased to see that at least we're at this stage, because we were nowhere a few years back on this. Thank you very much for keeping up, for doing this work for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Davidoff. Director Lockwood.
Thank you. And I'm sad to follow Director Davidoff, because I'm maybe gonna look at it in a different aspect. As I've heard the last director multiple times talk about how many students travel from his area and use the bus to get to Selkirk College, although Salmo and Area G can't do that same thing. And what I'm hearing is that all students are going to be paying for this. And our area has to use a vehicle, because there is no possible way of getting to Selkirk College to be there for a 9 o'clock or even 11 o'clock or even a 3 o'clock class. So my concern is that every student is not going to understand. Yes, it might be $60 right now, but what it is it's, and I'll use Salmo, Area G, Area D, whoever is subsidizing the ones that actually have transit that can get them there, with everybody having to pay for it. So I know that it's a Selkirk College that's going to, but are we going to make sure that they understand that they are actually subsidizing somebody else to use the bus, that they have to drive to get to college? So I get that we've been talking about a UPass for a long time, and I don't have a problem with a UPass, but I have a problem with everybody must have it. Yeah, I think that it must be that if you have the ability to use transit, you must have it.
So I would say, I'll let either Danica or Mr. Hill answer as well. But I would say that it's quite often colleges, you are paying in your student fees for things all the time that you as a student may not use, but it's the option for all the students to be able to use it. So a lot of student fees in colleges are based around that. So whether or not it's on-campus services, or whether or not it's sometimes, but if you're not living there. And the nuance is when we had a student that was going to Selkirk that was from Selma but lived with us 4 days a week so that they could live in town. And so now their address would be Selma, but they're actually living in Cascar 4 days a week. And so I think there's a lot of nuance into how colleges are set up, that you might be surprised at how much students are paying that they don't actually have access to maybe what they're paying for. That happens quite a bit. We do that a lot even in the tax realm, right? Where it's you're paying for something that you may not use, but it's so someone else can use it collectively, and you may be using it while you're in town. So you might be at Selkirk and now you have to go into town for something and come back out of town. So you do have access, even though you can't get from your home to Selkirk, you now can get from Selkirk into Castlegar to pick up something or back, or to some of the student activities that happen in and out of areas. So I don't think it's as black and white as using, not using, who pays it, who doesn't. Otherwise, our whole structure of taxes would break down. Because a lot of it is based on this nuance. Not that I don't agree in some sense. I don't know. Yeah, Mr. Doyle?
Yeah, respectfully through the chair, as noted, in conversations with many elected officials, one of the biggest barriers right now to further enfranchisement of public transit is the percentage of public transit that is funded by the taxpayer in the region. It's a challenge. It really is, because we have low population densities. We have these major corridors through, but trying to find ways to provide public transit in a successful fashion to, say, Selma or Caslo or these other areas in a consistent 5 days a week manner, so that people start to use public transit consistently. It is convenient, it is safe, it is actively available. The price tag on that is high, and so staff have really been focusing on trying to find new revenue sources. There are opportunities here with UPass to create additional revenue. Similarly, the negotiations with IHA to see, and doubling in Health Connections funding over the course of the next 3 years. If UPass were to come online and the doubling of Health Connections funds over the next 3 years, these things would happen almost in tandem. And at that point, we could be looking at further enfranchisement in rural areas. I don't know that we need more 99s. I think what we need is actually better connectivity from the rural areas to the 99s, and potentially some more direct routes down to the hospital, obviously. With UPass coming in, the student union in a way becomes a stakeholder, right? Not in the same sense as the people who sit at this table, the board members, but they do have a voice in public transit at that point, and it broadens the net. If you were to approach the students with that idea to say, like, look, everybody in this quarter is getting great service, but how do we make Selma livable for college students, right? Because that's where the affordable housing is, right? Or how do we create an opportunity to get from Selma to Selkirk College Trail? Because remember, we're talking about 3 different Selkirk College campuses here, potentially, possibly more, because they did exist in previous areas before. Selkirk College is cognizant of the fact that, with public transit, they can have satellite campuses in more rural communities, like in Selma and stuff too. So there are opportunities here, I guess it is my point. We are trying to broaden the net. We don't want to charge for services that people don't receive, but we do want to create the opportunities for people to receive those services. And UPass is one of the strategies that's been very well documented in other parts of the province.
Follow up, or are you okay?
Yeah, thank you. It might be well documented in other parts of the province, but they've got transit.
True.
And that's all I'm trying to say is that, and Selkirk College used to actually have a school in Samo, and it was well utilized, and they are starting to look at that again. Well, if you live in Samo or Area G, the chances of you actually getting a bus to come into Samo to attend Selkirk College is, I can tell you, nil. So I'm just concerned that with how much our transit has gone up, that I guess I look at it that, and I'm not against the UPass, it makes it sound like I'm against the UPass, is that the people that are using the transit going to Selkirk College right now are not new users. And what I think I'm hearing is that we're gonna have a whole bunch of new users. We're not gonna have a bunch of new users. We're gonna have a few, because people are gonna, well, I'm paying for it, I may as well use it, that live in the area that have that transit. And if it is the case that we have a whole bunch of new users, then that means that we are gonna have another bus. And that means that it's more taxation that is subsidizing that, to get that extra route, to get that extra bus, so I'm just looking at the whole bigger picture in that sense, is I don't see how this benefits, and I understand, yes, they pay for, I've had a few children go through university, but they always have access to use what they've paid for.
Moving on, Director Graham.
Thank you. I just have a couple of comments here. And one is with respect, through the chair, with respect to areas having service. My son went to Selkirk College, And the bus service, he couldn't take it because it didn't get him there in time. And his teacher didn't care and told him he had to be at school on time, so he hitchhiked. I also have a concern with students' ability to pay and if that is a consideration in this model. And lastly, I think I would personally be interested in seeing a business case analysis for this and if that is part of the process along the way. So like we can see how many more students, like how many people are using it now to your best guess. Like I don't see that in these documents. So I think that would be something useful for us to see and for the student union to see. Thank you.
Thanks. Danica or Mr. Dool, do you have any comments regarding that? Okay, go for it.
Respectfully through the chair, business case analysis comes once the students have agreed that they actually want to do this. There's no point doing the business case analysis prior because the students may not want to do this. So first it goes to them, then it comes back, then the board would receive a fulsome analysis prior to any decision to implementing this.
Thanks. Director Cunningham.
Thank you. Yeah, I think most of the comments I was going to say have been made. In fact, Selkirk has more than one campus, and it may be just that if you're going to the Nelson campus, that's true. And the points made by the director from Samo about lack of service is understandable. I do know, and I'm referring to Director Davidoff's comments through the chair, that we have tried a number of times. I think this is about the third or fourth time in my time on with the regional district. We have tried to institute a UPass thing, but it was turned down at the Selkirk College level each time. It didn't make it to institutions. So we can always be hopeful, and I certainly agree that if we did have UPass, perhaps we could also talk about better service for the Selmo area too. And further, my last comment on that thing is that we've always talked about a circular route rather than a straight one back and forth between Nelson and Castlegar. A circular route meaning where it would start in Nelson and go from Nelson to Castlegar to Trail to Selmo and back to Nelson, with the idea that if with two buses you could cover, you have 2 hour service all through the day. And I think if that was possible, I think our whole usage thing would be changed because people then would use the bus because it was there and it was reliable and it was frequent. And of course, the last thing, perhaps the most important, it's inexpensive. But I guess maybe we have to wait for that before we get the other. I don't know. I'm certainly willing to go for it and see what Selkirk says. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cunningham. Okay, don't have anyone else. Back over to you, Danica.
Thanks. I will say some, I'd say preliminary estimates were presented to the West Kootenay Transit Committee in the fall. And the estimate was that right now there's about $84,000 in sales done for Selkirk College students. So students purchasing student or semester passes, about $84,000. And based off of enrollment projections, sort of what they're doing now and what they anticipate in the future, the potential UPass as revenue was estimated to be between $180,000 and $250,000. So there is certainly expected to be some increase in transit usage, which I think would be welcome to most parts of the transit system. And then there would be some additional revenue that could either offset existing operating costs or potentially allow for some additional investment into the transit system. So those are just some sort of preliminary numbers that I hear there was some curiosity for, but I will move on to the next slide, which is more about our summer 2026 service change. So BC Transit is preparing to implement some schedule and routing changes to the local transit system on June 29th. This service change does coincide with a transition to a new facility, as we're trying to do everything sort of at the same time. So transit service for Castlegar and Trail will operate out of a new facility that BC Transit has purchased in Janelle. And while we are doing that move, we're doing some scheduling tweaks to align with that sort of move-in date. So next slide. So this has been presented in more detail to Castlegar, but some of the changes for Castlegar are just some minor adjustments to trip times on local routes to improve on-time performance. So it's been quite a while since routes were looked at in detail, and say a route in the schedule might take 24 minutes, but actually we look at our data and it's actually taking 26 minutes most of the time to run that route. We're just going to adjust the times a little bit so that the bus is where it's scheduled to be more often, and that we don't have sort of late or early buses. So minor adjustments expected for that. Also, Route 34 will be adjusted to mitigate an unsafe railroad crossing at 32nd Street. This will involve an extension. The bus was going to extend further down on 5th Avenue, which will introduce additional bus stops to that neighborhood. And then at peak times of the day, that route is going to deviate farther south into the Blueberry neighborhood three times a day. And this will allow the Route 98 regional connector between Trail and Castlegar to bypass Blueberry and avoid another safety issue that we've been having there, that right now we have a bus deviating into Blueberry and doing sort of a big loop around the neighborhood, which isn't ideal because that's more of an express route. So next slide. Also doing some changes in Nakusp. So the overall level of local transit service is quite high in Nakusp, and there's a lot of on-request service that has been underutilized. So on-request is a pickup and drop-off service, and where customers can call and get picked up sort of at a curb anywhere in town and be dropped off to another location, and it allows for a bit more flexibility without a scheduled fixed route. There hasn't been a lot of uptake on this service, so we're looking at reallocating some of this local on-request service hours to fixed route service to better align with demand and key destinations. So there'll be one additional round trip for the Route 52 to Slocan, and additional round trips as well to the Route 51 Hot Springs. And overall, it is a net reduction of 4 service hours per week to that local service area. So a little bit of sort of, I'd say, overall savings or cost reduction, and then some reallocation of on-request hours into fixed route. And next slide.
We have one question on that slide. We can go back.
Sure.
Dr. Weatherhead. Dr. Weatherhead, go right ahead.
Thank you. I'm sure that we'll be seeing more details around this, but just one question was the reduction of service hours is literally just from the reduction of the on-request service. Is that what I'm understanding? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then in addition to that, I know I had been talking a lot with staff on this around using the other routes to increase Hot Springs accessibility within those already established routes. Is that the idea of this as well, what I'm seeing?
Yes. So right now there is on request available sort of on Monday mornings, and that has been the lowest, I guess the most underutilized sort of time of day or of the week. So that service will be eliminated altogether. There'll still be on request service available on Monday afternoons. And then there is some periods of on request that right now are available in between fixed routes. So it might do a Route 52 to Slocan in the morning, and then it'll be available for on request, and then it'll do another Route 52 in the afternoon. So instead of that bus and that driver being available, but not necessarily doing anything during that on request time, that driver is going to start doing a fixed route that'll be in the schedule, and that hopefully there'll be more visibility on it and more ridership.
Thank you.
Great. Director McClaren-Cole.
Thanks, Chair. And through the chair, I just wanted to say thanks to Danica and Tom for coming up to talk to our staff about how to make things more efficient up here. But my question is, I don't see it in either the presentation or I think Tom's report later on the agenda. How do we communicate this to the public? Because if the on request hours are so underutilized, to me that seems like a problem of communication. So how do we tell them the new plan?
So typically when we do a service change, BC Transit handles the bulk of the sort of marketing and communication. So when we're preparing to put out a new rider's guide, particularly if there's significant sort of changes like this, we do news releases, we can do radio, we can do social media posts, we can do I'd say more like a sort of a poster or something that could be printed and put in more local sources. And we're always open to hearing from local governments or from NACUSP on what and how it might be best, sort of how we can work with any sort of their social media or their billboards or anything, just to be able to get as much notice out to people as possible. So we're always working with local governments and staff on how we can collaborate and make sure that the most number of people are informed. So if you have some ideas, particularly for residents of NACUSP, we're happy to hear them and to work to get notifications out.
Thanks very much.
Respectfully through the chair, our meeting in the cusp was really productive, connecting with village staff, and we spent a fair amount of the conversation talking about how we might better promote these services. On the regional district side of things, I've engaged our communication staff, Dan Elliott, on the matter. So we're having discussions there about what we can do. I really, from staff's perspective, the opportunity, particularly with the links to the hot springs that have been developed here, is to actually talk in other communities as well, Slocan, Silverton, New Denver, about how you can now get on the bus and pretty much go straight to the hot springs in NACUSP, where they'll give you a half price entrance because you rode the bus there, which is pretty phenomenal. It's quite an opportunity. And I know, talking with BC Transit staff, they thought that was a really exciting idea too. So hopefully we can get it, we can boost the message a little bit.
Thanks, Tom.
Great. Director Weatherhead?
Thank you. I know that I'm having more singular conversations with our staff on this, having been talking to a lot of my residents and also the bus drivers. And just wondering through the chair to Tom is, in those discussions with council, it possibly would have been useful to include me in that so that I can understand the bigger picture as well, because currently, we don't have any access in Area K to the hot springs runs. And that was one of the other pieces that I was hoping we also have. I know we'll be looking at Area K a little bit more focus there, but yeah, it just might be helpful sometimes when the regional district does reach out to the village of NACUSP to just include me in the discussion, because I like to hear and put it together with what I've got going in K.
Mr.
Respectfully through the chair, this was a staff meeting. We didn't actually present in front of council or anything. Had we presented in front of council, we would have obviously engaged the elected officials to create that conversation. The proposed solution, because you had expressed interest in trying to create that better connectivity, and I believe the proposed solution does give an opportunity now for people in Area K to then tie into one of those hot springs buses, because we're creating 4 additional round trips now. That's in the proposal. So one of your trips should line up pretty nicely to get residents of Area K out to the hot springs.
Thank you so much. And thanks for listening to me on that, Tom. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great. Not seeing anyone else. Over to you, Danica.
Okay, next slide. So this one, I think I'm going to talk about service to Salmo. I think there's likely, and if I'm missing a piece of information or we need to have some follow-up conversation, I think this is where we haven't had as much connection as possible. So I will say this is other proposed scheduling changes that we have the ability from a scheduling perspective to implement in the summer. We would be able to increase Route 72 Salmo service from 3 days a week to 5 days a week. We also have the ability to adjust the morning trip time to better suit commuters. So we could be implementing 5-day-a-week service to Salmo in the summer, if that was supported. We'd also be able to suspend the Route 15 Perrier because this Route 72 would provide coverage 5 days a week to that area. We're proposing to reduce service on the Route 14 Blewett to better align with demand, and this would just mean removing or suspending the 4 o'clock trip time, which is the most underutilized trip of the day. There are several other trips of the day that provide service to the Blewett area. And then we're also looking to eliminate a redundant service on the Route 20 Slocan, and this would involve suspending the 6:25 a.m. trip and adjusting some other trip times. Right now, I think there's multiple buses from the Slocan area arriving in Nelson at the same time. So this one is seen as the one that could be the most easily removed without impacting service to customers. So all of this we are able to do in a cost neutral way. There'd actually be, as a system, there would potentially be a little bit of savings because we are removing or reducing service in the cusp by 4 hours a week. A lot of the rest of these changes is just a reallocation of changes from one service to another service. The thinking was to Salmo area, and overall this would be a cost neutral change for overall a cost reduction for the regional district, but it's moving service sort of from one area to another. So there would be some changes for different electoral areas.
Great, thank you. We have a few questions. Director Graham.
So thank you through the chair. So my understanding now is that we have an apportionment. So for the changes for Area E, that the Area E taxpayers would see that benefit. And I do want to say I just want you to confirm that, but I really want to say a huge thank you here to Tom, because I have been dealing with complaints about empty buses in Blewett. So these two changes I think are very welcome, and I really want to just express my thank you. And I know I've been a pain to him, so I really thank you both for getting this onto this presentation, and hopefully this does go forward. But just to confirm that through apportionment, that if there is a savings, then it does go to that area group of taxpayers.
Tom?
Respectfully through the chair, the new apportionment method as proposed in the bylaws does look at hours, right? And specifically with routes like the 15 and the 14. So when we reduce the hours of service in that electoral area, their apportionment changes accordingly.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Director Rockwood.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm glad that apportionment was brought up. So would that change that there would be some apportionment going to Area E if we're going through Area Road, as our access went up 317% for transit?
Respectfully through the chair, there will be some changes. It's limited because again, the bus is pulling off one hook and to the side. It actually goes through Perrier right now.
Yeah.
We're looking at the stops, how they exist there. There will be some changes because we're talking about service levels here. But compared to the service that's currently offered now, it's still a significant net reduction for him.
Thank you. The supplemental, do we have a timeline on moving the hours so people can, because the conversation now is if we're gonna be paying this much more, we should be able to get to work on time. And right now we can't get into Nelson to start a 9 o'clock job, because unless you work right where the bus drops you off, but if you have to get to a different place, you can't get there for a 9 o'clock. So I'm wondering what is the difference in the timeline?
proposing, and I would really appreciate your feedback on this, but we're proposing it would arrive at the Nelson Exchange at 8:30. But it could be any time. So if 8:15 worked, if 8:45 worked, it's very flexible.
Okay, I will get back to you. Thank you.
Okay, and I will say most of this we have pretty nailed down, but we are under some pretty tight timelines because we are trying to introduce these changes with the July 20 or the June 29 service change because we don't want to put out a new rider's guide too frequently. So we're hoping to get all of these in. So if there are any changes or any I'd say anything that isn't supported, I would have to know pretty quickly. So if you do have some feedback on the morning times, please let me know what would work best.
Okay.
All right. Oh, I can go on to the last couple slides if there's no more questions. So this is a bit of an update on fare and service reviews. So this last bunch of proposed changes I was talking about, I'll say are addressing some sort of demand and efficiencies that were, I'd say, the low-hanging fruit in the system. They were easy to find, they were easy on our sort of scheduling and where the buses go and how our fleet is coordinated. They were relatively easy for us to try and squeeze into this service change that we're doing in June. I understand, and I've certainly heard from Central Kootenay and from your partners in Kootenay Boundary that there is a desire for a more sort of robust review of the system, and that will be starting in sort of the spring, later, a little bit later this year, probably spring and over the summer of 2026, and that would involve a more robust look at the system and sort of bigger connections and potentially bigger proposed changes on optimizing existing resources and improving regional connectivity. And at that time, also looking at some options or recommendations to reallocate resources within the system and maybe, between funding partners or within electoral areas of each funding partner, but potentially some more significant changes. And again, focusing on, optimizing existing resources, not so much of a focus on expanding or increasing service levels, because right now the sort of message we're getting from the province is that we should be prepared to have stable levels of funding from the province for our transit system, and there may not be the ability to enhance service levels potentially for a couple years. So definitely want to keep focusing on just the overall level of service within the West Kootenay transit system. And then, sorry, I skipped over this, and then a fare review. It has been fare review. We will start talking about that in the spring, and more information will initially come to the West Kootenay Transit Committee about what a fare review looks like, the process for that, again with multiple local government partners that have to come aligned and agree. We anticipate this might be a longer process and might not be something we would really get into until maybe even 2027, where a decision would be made and we'd be looking to make changes to the fare structure if agreements were made. But we'll kick off sort of both of these reviews later this year.
We have one question, Director Watson.
Thank you. I'm just curious, in these reviews, do they include any resident engagement, user engagement? If they do, I have a follow-up.
They can, and that is ultimately up to the local governments on what level of public engagement is desired. And that can be sort of a robust engagement at the beginning to be seeking sort of feedback, or it can be more of a, more robust, inform customers and clients about sort of decisions or proposed changes that are being considered, or informing them about decisions that have been made. And the timelines, again, for both of these reviews will depend somewhat on whether or not there is a desire to have public engagement.
Thank you. Supplemental?
Right ahead.
Thanks. So noting the other item on this agenda today in terms of a kind of an assessment of, I represent the area that includes the Argenta bus. And I've really struggled with, is this worth it? Is it not worth it? My quick math says that each trip is over $100 currently. So I get that we're going to look at some kind of feasibility around other options. So that's great. That being said, what I want to note is however that integrates into this fare and service review. The last time we did any kind of engagement, which was actually, I believe, led by BC Hydro. Sorry, was I emailing BC Hydro 5 minutes ago? Yes, I was. Sorry about that. BC Transit. The layout of it was just so not functional. There were so many residents that were unable to engage, unable to attend like one open house. And so my input is I very much value public feedback, specifically around, is this valuable to you? It's probably one of the biggest parts of our tax bill up here. And I want to know from them, is this of use to you? Is this of value to you? And also that the way you seek that is really, I don't know if robust is the right word, but really flexible to the note that a lot of people are not going to come to an open house during the day, during business hours. And that surveys are really good. There's so few people that use it. You could probably just do a one-on-one with them and then do surveys for those that don't use it. So that's my feedback on that. And I appreciate that the other work that is being proposed by Alex could probably somehow dovetail into that. So that's my input. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. No other questions. Back over to you.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Just give you a little bit of data that we get out of our UMO report. So again, we do have UMO contactless payment installed, and the BC Bus Pass is now integrated into the system. So customers who do get a BC Bus Pass through that provincial program are now able to validate it using the UMO validator, just like everyone else with a UMO card. And then we are preparing to launch the TAP for credit and debit cards. It has been successfully launched in Whistler and Pemberton just recently. And later this year, that technology will sort of be, I'll say, turned on in the West Kootenay transit system as well. And that'll make it easier for anyone who doesn't want to register or doesn't use the bus very often, or maybe is visiting the area. They can just take out a debit or credit card and use that as they're boarding the bus. All right, next slide. Just throw up some of the sort of information that we get out of the UMO sales. So we get these monthly reports. Again, this is only showing past sales for UMO customers. It doesn't include anyone who is paying for it with cash. Just shows you the breakdown of the types of fare products that people are using. And this is from January. So you can see there is, 35% of past sales were the student semester passes. This is high school students as well as Selkirk College students. I can go to the next slide. Also get sort of boarding information. So you can see sort of the most, I'd say, popular routes for boarding. So we always have our 98 and our 99s are always in the top 5. And next slide. And then I just have the last couple of slides just on updates on our infrastructure projects. So the new transit exchange in Nelson has been completed and is in service. I have been there at night, and it is very nice to see the illuminated bus shelters. It does give a very nice sort of effect of the area and is very welcoming and safe feeling. There's also public washrooms that are available now. And then the next slide is the new transit exchange in Trail. So the City of Trail and the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary have just endorsed the final design, and we will now be proceeding to the construction phase of this. Construction is expected to begin in the summer, and if things go smoothly, the exchange should be in service in about October of this year. And that will include several bus bays, an operator washroom, a public washroom, and new shelters and landscaping for the area.
We have a question from Director Popoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Through the chair to Danica. When you mentioned washrooms, that kind of twigged a little bit of a memory on me. Like we have a major exchange at the Playmore Junction and no washroom facilities. And I've been asking for washroom facilities there for quite a few years because most of the people are using the bushes. And there was a restaurant that they were using there, but the restaurant's closed down now. And it is a problem for, bus users to be there and not have a washroom facility. Have you looked into that at all?
I haven't. I am not. Typically, I think getting a washroom facility at an exchange or at an area like Playmore would likely fall to the regional district to initiate. We are able to, so these new exchanges with the washrooms, we did leverage a lot of federal funding through the ISIP program, and then the washrooms were sort of incorporated into the greater design of it. I'd have to look into how we would, or whether BC Transit has any experience or ability to support a sort of, I'd say, standalone washroom. I know that there's a lot of options that we've looked at in other areas for operators, but I am not familiar with what we do for, or whether we do get involved when it is a passenger washroom. But I can look into that. We do have some interesting sort of, I'd say, fancy portable washrooms. There's sort of like a really snazzy outhouse that has running water and flush toilets that we do have in some other areas that our operators rely on when they don't have washroom access. And they aren't open to the public though. And I think that would introduce some other liabilities and maintenance that we'd certainly have to figure out how that would get taken care of.
Well, a supplemental, if I may, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, I thank you for taking a look into it. But just for your information, and I know I've talked to Tom about this, and that property is basically owned by Ministry of Transportation. That's there. So we'd probably have to, because it is a provincial piece of property, it's probably best that we start at a provincial level. So just a point of information. I don't expect an answer, but I'd like to thank you for taking a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. No other questions, moving on.
That's all from me. You can go to the next slide, which is just sort of the end, but happy to take any last questions or comments.
Great, thank you. Not seeing any in here or online, so thank you very much for your presentation and all the information, and again, all the hard work you do for us. Okay, we are moving on to 6.2. Who is taking 6.2? Mr. Leflar, is that you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to do the first bit and then you want to cover
Great.
the second bit?
Great, over to you, Mr. Dool.
Good morning. As I mentioned previously, my name is Tom Dool. I'm a research analyst for the Regional District of Central Kootenay. I've been working with Alex here, who is our community action assistant, on a proposal regarding rural transit operating models and feasibility assessments. We'd like to talk to you a little bit about the idea today and then seek direction to pursue a grant to fund an evaluation. Next slide, please. So there are currently four operating models really in the regional district of Central Kootenay insofar as transit goes. And these are very standard BC Transit operating models. I want to confirm for you that when we talk about transit in the regional district of Central Kootenay, what we're really talking about is buses with BC Transit on the side. I know I've had these conversations with some directors, but not so much with other directors. Sometimes we do get directors coming or community members coming seeking alternatives to that. And what I've always said in the past is that's not really in scope for the services that we provide right now. But having said that, there is an entire transportation ecosystem out there. There are alternatives, and it may warrant that we investigate sort of a means of providing services or service models outside of the four services that you see on the slide right now, which most of you are aware of or familiar with. Obviously conventional services, big scheduled services, those are our big people movers. We have health connection services to some of our smaller rural communities to get to health hubs. We have HandyDart, which is sort of that door-to-door wheelchair assist, mobility assist service. And then we have paratransit, which allows us a tremendous amount of flexibility in the rural areas for smaller services. These generally involve smaller buses. Many of them also have lift assist and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. There are a number of advantages to the current models. When I talk about alternative models, I don't want to cast any shade on the services being provided by BC Transit. Really, for the vast majority of public transit services received, this is the way to do it. It's been recognized nationally and internationally that the BC Transit service model is extremely effective. It allows better fleet management because we can manage large fleets across big areas. To have our relationships between the City of Nelson, RDKB, RDCK that we currently leverage right now, that wouldn't be possible without BC Transit. Operator management, insofar as procurement goes, we can procure some of the largest operators in North America to leverage economies of scale. We can also, procure with municipalities, right, to really get a local effect, which is, very effective. Planning and financial services, there's an entire team of people at BC Transit that I can draw on, when I need information or data or financial information, that sorts of thing. If I want to talk to local governments or service providers in areas outside of ours, I have immediate access, which is very exciting. So for 99% of the rides provided, we have what I would argue is probably one of the best solutions going. Next slide, please. Having said that, there are some disadvantages in certain situations. There's a minimum scale to realize value, obviously. And that applies to all transit, but particularly when you're managing fleets, like, for example, our fleet here has two different kinds of buses. And the reason we have two different kinds of buses is because those are the most effective buses for the vast majority of trips. Procurement is done for the entire system. BC Transit manages, I think, close to 1,600 buses all across the entire province. And those buses are moving from system to system constantly, depending on where the best fit is, what the asset management plan looks like, that sort of thing. So sometimes in small rural circumstances, we may not say, for example, have a bus that's quite small enough. When you only got 6 riders, but your smallest bus is a 20-seat bus, you're not really going to hit that capacity, but it's the smallest bus you have, right? Some transportation needs will not be met with the current operating models, those 4 models. So next slide, please. But what we do have here is we have a great opportunity for comparison because we have a lot of data. Danica was showing you the information collected by UMO. So we have a ton of ridership information. We have operating cost information. We have automated passenger counters. We have lots and lots of data. So we can look at some of our smaller routes, particularly what came up because we've had discussions around that Argenta route, where we know there's value in the route, but what is the best way to provide those services is really the way we're trying to approach this. So we can look at the BC Transit model and say, okay, this is what it costs to provide those services. And I want to highlight right now that one of the advantages to our BC Transit model is that we have a 50% cost share on that route with BC Transit. So if it's $184 an hour to provide that service, $90 of that hour, or $92 of that hour is actually coming from the provincial government, right? Yeah. Yeah, the committee has established transit service. So we have a ton of data. We have a set of values that the committee has decided upon in the past year. So using our transit service values. Now, I think what really sits here well is the opportunity to apply those values to come up with some alternative models and then compare them to the BC Transit model, because we have all that data, right? And look at, is there a more cost-effective way to provide these services? Is there a different way to provide those services but still be aligned with the values that the committee had decided upon earlier? In that comparison, we would bring that comparison back to the committee, obviously, for consideration. And I think we have a couple sort of models, a couple sort of test cases we would like to look at. But I think those test cases will actually inform decision-making or service level selection right across the whole regional district. Next slide, please. Alex, you want to jump in?
Sure.
Or do you want me to?
You can cover the two routes. You know that
Okay.
one better, but
Yeah, so we're going to look at, or I would like to propose that we would like to look at two different routes. So we have the Caslo Argenta 58 and the Edgewood Nakusp 53. These are both small routes with long distances into rural areas. So they're quite expensive to operate on a relative scale, but they're also relatively low service levels. That's not to say that to the people who ride those buses aren't incredibly important. I think they provide, a critical link for a lot of community members. And I've heard the stories from those members talking to people specifically who ride these buses. But the question at the end of the day is, again, can we do an analysis looking at the cost of providing these services within the BC Transit model? And are there alternative models out there so that we can maybe bring some of these costs down and maybe change the service levels a bit to better fit remote rural circumstances? Next slide, please.
so to give a quick backdrop on why I'm here during our climate action engagement, what we noted is that residents were really interested in transportation. And then as we thought about the organizational structure, as Tom mentioned, the transit service is very focused. It's buses and it does that really well. And there's all of these other transportation issues and initiatives that residents bring up that don't really fit within our current service structure. And so in April last year, board adopted bylaw 3005, which established the Rural Mobility Community Advisory Committee. And with that group of people, we sat down and we started talking about what sort of initiatives or research areas we could start investigating. One of these areas was alternative forms of transit and what potentially that could look like. So I've been connecting with Todd over the past 6 months and starting to sit in on West Service Transit Committee meetings, just to understand currently what's going on within our transit system, and then maybe some of these potential areas where we could look at alternatives. And so as Todd mentioned, the two that we're looking at are the most rural bus services, I believe the paratransit models, and just exploring through this feasibility study some alternative possibilities. And some of the benefits that this could bring is potentially get more seats filled, maybe reduce costs and the burden on taxpayers, and then improve service convenience and availability for those residents. And next slide. Any questions?
Great. So we'll start with Director McLaren-Coe.
Thanks, Chair. And I just want to say quickly through to staff that I just really appreciate the work that you've done on this, and it's a multi-year process to find alternative ways to approach transit and give us the tools that we need to make good governance decisions on how to establish the service levels that we want to see. And my question is a little curiosity. I think on one of the slides you said through to staff that there was 98% of the rides are well serviced with the current model, but presumably most of those rides are aggregated in certain routes because they're effective routes. is there a way to quantify how many of those routes are effective, not just the rides?
Mr. Joel?
Respectfully to the chair, yeah, there is. I mean, that's what the values are about. What are we trying to, like, what is the committee's goal? What is the committee trying to achieve through public transit, right? And one of the things the committee arrived on in the values assessment was that transit is a social service. So, you know, one of the things that public transit does, and I think we can say that it does it well in the regional district of Central Kootenay, is it provides access to services for high barrier populations. People who don't have access to cars can get to services in service centers fairly effectively. There's always going to be room for improvement. You know, if you want to put a number on that, we could look at numbers for that. Actually, there are KPIs that we can use to register that. But one of the things we heard from the committee during that values assessment was that narratives actually matter a lot. Talking to people and hearing the narratives. Okay, like, this is how I get my groceries. This is how I get to my pharmacist. This is how I got to my court date. These sort of critical pieces. So, yeah, obviously we hear a lot more of those stories in sort of E, F, H, I, J, Castlegar, Nelson, along this backbone corridor. In the remote areas, again, and having talked to people specifically in Argenta and specifically who use that Edgewood run, it's critical to them, but there's very, very few of them. And hey, how do we continue, like, how does the committee maintain loyalty to the values, acknowledging that this is a social service and it is critical to get these people to these services to make rural areas livable, but at the same time control the costs, because that was another value that was identified. Both the absolute cost of transit and the cost of transit to the service participants being the electoral areas and the municipalities. So it's really what we're focused on right now is the cost to the service participant while maintaining transit as a social service. There's a balancing act there.
For sure. And I appreciate you're doing all that work. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks. Director Watson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd like to move the motion and then I have a couple questions and I can read the motion if you'd like.
Yeah, if you can read it, that'd be great.
That the board direct staff to submit an application to the Climate Ready Infrastructure Service Fund for up to $20,000 in consultant support to undertake the rural transit operating model feasibility assessment.
Great. A seconder. And over to your comments.
Yeah, thanks. So a couple of them. This is great. I really appreciate it. Obviously, because Dee's included, I'm grateful. But a couple notes. First, on the grant application itself, Tom or Alex, whoever wrote it, you're not including the rural areas in the communities identified. So you're missing about 50 communities you could be identifying. You only have Caslow and Nakusp noted. For D, you'd have 24 additional communities plus 1,380 residents. So I'd highly recommend you include those stats. And then in terms of the, also again on the grant application, I appreciate reading those because it's curious, but it does mean I end up having more input. It doesn't mention anything about the engagement. I would assume you're going to use the Rural Mobility Committee, which it was established for, as you noted. However, that committee does not have adequate representation for D. I haven't looked at K. Kate, I'm sure Weatherhead will comment on that, but I would like to ask that you include links in that because they have done their own research and have quite a bit of background in trying to look at different ways of doing like volunteer drivers and owning vehicles and all that kind of stuff. They also looked at the share thing, and there was reasons why it didn't function well. So they would have a lot of data that would be very helpful to your work. So can you please include links in your engagement?
For the chair, definitely. Yeah, we've been in touch with Links and many of the community service societies active in both communities. So we will make sure to engage those folks.
Good. Great. Director Jackson.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So we did hear earlier, Director Watson made a reference to how it would be good to dovetail this work with what Danica described as a more robust review starting in spring 2026. And of course, I agree with that. What it appears though is this is another initiative where we're going to go to a consultant who might have a great deal of knowledge about the world beyond the Kootenays, but has far less knowledge than the people who live here. We're talking about giving money to experts. Well, Tom Dool is probably the expert. It says 20K to consultant support. What about using some of this grant money for in-house costs? There's never anything wrong with that. When you hire a consultant, it costs us money through contract management, general admin. I don't see the 15% for that in the grant. So in general, I think going out to these consultants can be problematic because we don't indicate our level of input to it, our costs, the taxpayer costs. You can say, well, we're going to have these people on staff anyway, but we need to be more specific with where this money should flow. So maybe it should say 17,000 for outside entities, $3,000 for internal, 15%. Then the outside entities, what are we going to learn from a consultant? If you were to talk to local society,
Director Jackman, just before you continue, I just want to make sure, because it might depend on where you go with the next thought, is Mr. Dool, do you want to, or Alex, okay,
Yeah.
about some of the costs that you're talking about and what's eligible and not eligible within the grant?
Yeah,
Sure.
respectfully through the chair, a couple of things. Before this grant opportunity came up, Tom and I were already discussing this. Unfortunately, through this grant, the Climate Ready Infrastructure Service, the only thing that is eligible is consultant support. And what this grant's actually allowing us to do is offset resources that were already dedicated to this through staff time.
so those numbers should show under the financial section of any board report that you are offsetting X dollars and adding or augmenting that with additional dollars. And I still question what a consultant would be. What's a little problematic to me is there's a box tick that says that the reason for making this application was, quote, an expert referred me and we're recommending a sole individual get this money from one firm. That would be Andrew Martin from Watt Consulting. So it's circuitous, whereas that may not be the expert we need. The consultant doesn't have to necessarily be someone in one of these companies. So I'd like to go back to my train of thought. If you're to talk to local societies about how to support them with van service, we're talking if they have an approved commercial license or route, which is under Wayfreeze Transportation Society, East Shore, and they have certified buses or vans, and they have certified drivers. I don't think we're going to learn much from this consultant. What we're going to learn is that is the path. Reason being, if you take a bus at huge cost and use it 1 or 2 days a week, you have to return it to the population center every night, as opposed to a van at a fraction of the cost, which is parked at the remote site every night because you don't have to run it every day. It's not that expensive of infrastructure. So to me, the recommendations we're going to get are incredibly obvious. We cannot afford a bus to be going to the furthest corners of our areas with, Tom mentioned, sometimes it's a small number of people versus a van. So I think, I don't want to say futile, but I think 20,000 to a consultant on their recommendation to give their opinion will result in telling us exactly what we already know. We can't afford these expensive buses because we can't afford to park them where the actual starting point of the driver in 2 round trips would make a full shift. It's pretty obvious to me. So 2 points. We do need to identify the offset costs for offsetting costs as part of the reason we're going out for a grant. Because our residents know that when we go out and grab a grant, there's more cost to it than on the surface. 2, do we really expect to learn very much from this? I would rather see the staff report on the analysis of existing societies that are struggling and how far 10 or 20,000 a year would go to support them versus going off to a consultant.
Staff, any thoughts or comments on that? Yeah, Mr. Dool?
Respectfully through the chair, the challenge for staff right now, and it's an interesting challenge, and it requires a set of skills that we really don't have in-house at this point. The way this was sort of envisioned is that I would provide a bunch of data support, provide that link to BC Transit, and then we would be able to take the information that BC Transit has and really look at it almost through an engineering mindset, and come up with a much more targeted analysis. So looking at a cost breakdown of that BC Transit model and find the weaknesses in that model, find the opportunities in that model, and then explore other models. And when we talk, I appreciate looking at the volunteer van driver. That's one scenario, but the other scenario is contracting out. In the case of, say, someplace like Caslo, which actually has a bus company based there, is there an opportunity to contract with somebody there? What would be required to make those contracts work? What would be the term of those contracts? Would we engage, would the regional district actually own the rolling assets and then supply the rolling assets over to community groups or to a contractor? Would the regional district hold insurance? Where are the barriers to community van, to the community van models, right? Like, I know they're out there, but I also know that in a lot of cases, most of them don't actually last more than a couple of years. There are barriers there. And I've talked to people in communities about those barriers, but I think oftentimes what's really lacking here is a real business model. And again, that engineering mindset of just looking at those costs, looking at it as though it's a transportation product or a transportation project actually designed by a transportation planner, which unfortunately Alex and I are not.
Okay, moving on, Director Weatherhead.
And thank you, through the chair, to staff. I just to echo a little bit of Chair Watson's, that I do want the if within this, I do support this, but I do want to make sure that it's the voices from the people of Area K using it are heard, because there's actually other aspects of services that possibly could be filled locally that may not be realized. And I don't know if the committee members within NACUSP have possibly the insight. I can't say whether they do or whether they don't. I strongly support alternative service in terms of what we have already done prior to regional district taking on the BC Transit, that we already had it taken on through our local community services. So I want to look at flexibilities, but I also want to look at what we can do even better in terms of servicing the Edgewood Run, because it currently now it does have limitations. And so I would just like to make sure there's a real broad voice weighing in on this.
Respectfully through the chair, I mean, one of the models that this feasibility study would be looking at is incorporating those community services, whether it's Erin Spokane Lakes or, depending on which area those community services change. But we know they run shuttles. I'm in very close contact with them, and they'll definitely be engaged in this project. And really, it's a deep dive into the economics and risk management and liability of what that model would look like with a community service society, or what that model would look like with a small business, such as a bus service.
Good. Okay. Director Cunningham.
Thank you. Thank you. Through the chair to staff. I like the idea of getting a consultant. If this consultant comes and asks us as directors or the public as to what some of the things they would like to see. As for example, I talked about the circular model of transit during the earlier, and is that the kind of thing that will also be looked at? I realize it goes through, and I think that's also something that could prove. I think it's easy to make a really good business model for that circular transit thing, in spite of the fact that we're working with trail transit or whatever, so that's my question. Can that kind of thing be included in the study?
Mr. Drew?
Respectfully through the chair, the idea of a circular service loop has come up in the past. That would be a part of the overall BC Transit review of the system that Danica was talking about earlier. If those ideas are there, that is the lens, because that's a BC Transit service. What we're really looking at here, what we're seeking grant funding or permission to seek grant funding for is to look at alternatives to the BC Transit model in rural and small communities.
Additionally, through the chair, as Tom mentioned, the BC Transit model has so many benefits. And in these alternative models, there are also benefits. And some of that is around the flexibility of these smaller, unique services. And so I think that's what the model or the feasibility study will really dive into, is like, what are those specific benefits? Is it scheduling or route structure? Like, what are the benefits that can be leveraged through these unique models for rural communities?
Supplemental, Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
through the staff. One of the big downfalls from living in the Selmo area, of course, is that we have no direct way to get to the hospital. So you either use a local driver or I don't know, if you take the bus, it takes 2 days to get to the hospital and 2 days to get back. So that's not likely. But perhaps a van, as was mentioned, or a small unit that would run between Selmo and the hospital would certainly help people who have hospital appointments. And I think something like that would be wonderful if it were included.
Great, thank you. Director Walker.
Yeah,
You
I
wanna
can
answer?
speak to
Okay.
that. Hans, outside of this project, I'm working on other projects with the Rural Mobility Community Advisory Committee that includes Salmo Community Services. And we're discussing what the different models of volunteer driver programs and medical shuttles could look like as well. So yeah, I'm happy to connect offline about that project.
Thanks, Director Walker.
Thank you, and through the chair, so I understand what Director Jackman was saying. Samo has spent $50,000 on 2 transit because we had to prove that we needed transit. And what we found, and the reason there was 2 is because there wasn't enough information in the first one to give us the whole entire picture. And that was, like I said, $50,000 that incorporated Area G also. And I want to make sure that going through with this or to benefit, because I do believe that the benefit comes to all rural areas. It's even though it's K and D and Caslo and Acusp that are that's somebody's got to be the lookabout. They're the farthest out, so they're probably the best to use. But to really make sure, as all the directors have said, is that the questions that are given to the contractor is very specific in what you're looking for. Because that's why we ended up, is we just thought, oh, the contractor knows we spent the most amount, and they didn't come back with the information that we really needed. And that's why we had to go out again, is that we didn't hone in those specific, like, we don't want a conventional bus going here. You need to look at the absolute best business case scenario in these, and to be able to hone that down, that's a huge lesson that we learned, and we ended up getting it a lot cheaper the second time around because a lot of information was done. And how does it, like, I understand it's for those areas, but how does it come back to this committee to benefit everybody?
Respectfully through the chair, I think what makes this project interesting is that we have so much information now about these existing routes, in terms of operating costs, in terms of how they function, in terms of the kind of ridership that they generate, the amount of hours required, how effective these routes are. And that gives a sort of a baseline with which to then create alternative models and then do a comparative analysis, right? And so as we do that comparative analysis, it may come back that the best way to do the best way to provide these alternative transportation services is maybe through community health societies or community service societies, right? And so we can then lean into that in other communities saying like, okay, that's going to be our starting point if people are interested in these services. Perhaps it's volunteer driver societies. Perhaps it's just contracting services with contract service providers, but it's going to start to give us a roadmap. We consistently hear that people want alternative services in these communities, but we have no baseline with which to provide costing. I have no idea where the barriers are. And what I'd like to do is I'd like a bit of a roadmap before we start down this road. The Regional District of Central Kootenay has not engaged in transportation services outside of those services provided by BC Transit. This is the first step in looking at that. I would like that first step to be done in a fashion that is informed and just reduces the number of wild goose chases we go on. There are a lot of different alternatives out there. We would like to sort of come up with a best 3 options when we get into this sphere.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we have a motion on the table, so I will call the question on that motion. All those in favor? Okay, and any opposed? Director Weatherhead, is that an opposed or you have a question?
I have no idea how that got there.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
I don't know how to get rid of it either.
I'll just ignore it then, we're good.
Thank you.
Okay, great, so that passes. Great, thanks everyone. So we have one more agenda item, so I think we're just gonna push through and not take a break and hopefully get through it. So over to 6.3, transit service level updates. Over to you, Mr. Dool.
Respectfully through the chair, I was providing those updates because I had communicated with a number of members on this community about service level changes specific to their community. I just wanted to formalize them, put them in a report for the committee so that they're accessible in the future and available to the public.
Great. Any questions on that report from anyone that you can see them? Okay. Not seeing any. Great. Public time. We do have one observer on there. This is your time to ask us questions. Please make sure they're respectful and kind. Otherwise we will mute you and I will make myself available to speak later. Over to you, Carly. If there is observer, if you have any questions, please just unmute and ask your question now. Once. Oh, yes, I see that. I'm sorry, staff from Nelson too. If you have any questions for us. So anyone who's here doesn't have freedom of the floor. Go once, going twice. Not seeing any. Great, then I call for adjournment.
So
Great. All those in favor, great. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.